The morning is ordinary, right up until it isn't. A girl is on a hillside somewhere in Israel, doing whatever a girl does on an ordinary morning, carrying water, minding a smaller sibling, half listening for her mother's voice. Then there's dust on the road that shouldn't be there. Then there are men on horses who do not belong to her country. Then her mother's voice again, except now it's getting smaller behind her, and it will keep getting smaller for the rest of her life. You already know how this kind of morning ends. It ends with a child in a foreign house serving a family that speaks a different language under a roof that will never be home. It ends with a name nobody in that house will ever bother to ask for. Here's what most people miss about this story. The most important person in it never gets one name. Not a name, not a hometown, not one physical detail, beyond 4 words in the original Hebrew that simply mean little girl. Small, young, powerless twice over, once for her age, once for her chains. And yet, centuries later, in a synagogue in a town called Nazareth, a man will stand up, unroll a scroll, and speak this exact nameless girl's story out loud, on purpose. And the people listening will be so enraged by what he says about her that they will drag him to the edge of a cliff and try to throw him off. We will get there, but not yet. This is not a story about a general, though there is one, and he is decorated and dying at the same time. This is not a story about a river, though a river changes everything. This is not a story about a miracle, though a miracle is coming. This is a story about a girl who was never given the dignity of a name, and about the 11 words she said anyway to the wife of the man whose army had likely helped destroy her family. Stay with me, because if God can build a chapter like this one around the smallest voice in the room, it changes what you're allowed to believe about your own.
Now meet the man on the other side of this story. His name is Naaman, and if you lived in Aram in his lifetime, you would know that name the way you know a 5-star general's name today, the way you'd know the man who just won the war. 2 Kings tells you flatly that he is a great man, honorable, a man of valor, commander of the entire army of a nation that had just handed Israel a military defeat. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, backs this up. He writes about Naaman as a genuinely formidable figure in the Aramean court, not some minor officer, a legend. This is not a man used to being told no. This is not a man used to waiting in anyone's doorway. But underneath the armor, underneath the medals, underneath the reputation, Naaman has tsarat, skin disease, the kind that, depending on how it progressed, could get a man quietly avoided, then not so quietly avoided, then finally cut off from his own people altogether. Picture that for a second. A 5-star general, feared on the battlefield, terrified in private, hiding a countdown clock under his sleeve that no army, no medal, and no amount of gold can stop. In public, men salute him. In private, he is running out of time, and he knows it. Here's the part nobody tells you. The most powerful man in this chapter and the least powerful person in it are standing in the very same house. Because somewhere along the way, during one of Aram's raids into Israelite territory, soldiers dragged a little girl out of her home and carried her back across the border, and she ends up serving in Naaman's household, under his wife. Try to sit in that for a moment instead of rushing past it. This girl wakes up every day in the home of the very kind of man whose raiders tore her out of her mother's arms. She grinds grain before sunrise. She fixes his wife's hair. She carries water up the same stone steps every single day in a language that used to be foreign to her ears and is now the only language she's allowed to speak out loud. She is property in a house that used to be enemy territory to her.
If anyone in this story had a right to silence, to bitterness, to watching a proud man rot from the inside and saying absolutely nothing, it's her. And that's exactly what makes what happens next so strange. Because one day, this girl, still unnamed, still enslaved, still a captive in a country that took everything from her, turns to her mistress and says a sentence, just one. The text records it almost as an afterthought, the way you'd record something said in passing over dishes. Would it to God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, he would heal him of his leprosy. 11 words in the Old English translation, fewer in the Hebrew. That's the entire recorded speech of a girl who otherwise has 0 lines, 0 name, and 0 reason to care whether the man who enslaved her lives or dies covered in disease. And this is where it gets remarkable. She doesn't say it to get anything. There's no bargain in it, no request for her own freedom attached, no visible motive except this. She knows something true about a prophet in a town she used to call home, and she decides, enslaved, grieving, entirely without power, to hand that truth to the household that stole her life. You don't get to skip past how strange that is. A person with every reason to want Naaman's downfall becomes the single reason he gets saved. And notice what the sentence is not. It's not a demand, it's not a sermon, it's not even addressed to Naaman directly. She says it to his wife, one more woman without her own name in this story, who then has to decide whether to bother repeating it to his husband. 2 unnamed women passing one true sentence up a chain of command until it finally reaches the man with the power to act on it. That's how this miracle starts. Not with a prophet, not with a king, not with an army. It starts with the smallest, least powerful voice in the entire household, a voice nobody in that house had any reason to listen to. And it works anyway.
Pause here for a second, because there's a pattern forming that's going to repeat itself over and over for the rest of this chapter, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Power keeps failing in this story, and powerlessness keeps working. A great commander can't heal himself. A king, when he hears the request, tears his own clothes in panic instead of helping. But a slave girl with no name and a wife with no name managed to do in 11 words what armies and thrones can't touch. If that pattern is already bothering you a little, good, it should. Hold on to that feeling. It gets stronger from here, not weaker. If you've made it this far, you already know this channel exists to dig into exactly these kinds of overlooked people in Scripture. The ones history forgot to name, but God apparently didn't. Hit subscribe if that's the kind of story you want more of, and drop a comment telling me which unnamed person from the Bible you want covered next. I read every one. Now, back to the house of Naaman, because the hardest part of this story hasn't even started yet.
Naaman takes the girl's sentence to his king. And here's the first way power gets this wrong. The king of Aram doesn't send Naaman to Israel with humility. He sends him with a letter and a small fortune, 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, 10 changes of fine clothing. He treats a spiritual problem like a business transaction, the same way you'd send an ambassador with gifts to smooth over a trade deal. Bring enough silver, and surely any door will open. It almost starts a war instead. Because when the king of Israel, Jehoram, son of the infamous Ahab, reads that letter demanding he heal a foreign general of leprosy, he doesn't see an opportunity, he sees a trap. He tears his own royal robes and cries out, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends to me to heal a man of his leprosy?" He assumes Aram is picking a fight, looking for an excuse to invade. The most powerful man in Israel, faced with this moment, responds with pure panic. Word reaches Elisha the prophet out in his own house, and his response is almost jarringly calm by comparison. "Send him to me. Let him know there's a prophet in Israel." So Naaman shows up. Chariots, horses, an entourage worthy of a 5-star general arriving at a prophet's front door. Back home, this is the kind of arrival that stops traffic, the kind of moment where a whole household drops what it's doing to receive him properly. And Elisha doesn't even come outside. He sends a messenger instead. 4 short sentences. "Go wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you'll be clean." That's it. No ceremony, no grand gesture, no laying on of hands from a famous prophet standing face to face with a famous general. Naaman is furious. Pay attention to this, because it's one of the most human moments in the entire Old Testament. Naaman rages, not because the instructions are hard, but because they're insultingly simple. He expected Elisha himself to come out, wave his hand over the sore spot, call on the name of his God, and there it would be, healed, dramatic, worthy of the man Naaman believes himself to be. Instead, he gets a servant at the door and a river assignment a child could complete. "Are not the rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel?" he shouts, and turns to leave in a rage, ready to go home diseased rather than obey something this small. Here's what most people miss about this moment. Naaman was healed by more powerless people than just the girl, because his own servants, again no names given, again the people history didn't bother to record, step in and talk him down. "My father," they say, "if the prophet had asked you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be clean'?" Think about the position they're in. These are men employed by a proud, furious 5-star general who could end their careers or worse for speaking out of turn, and they risk it anyway, because they can see what his pride can't, that the smallness of the instruction was never the problem. Naaman listens. That's the part that should stop you. A man too proud to obey a prophet is not too proud to be talked down by his own servants, the exact same kind of person, socially speaking, as the girl who started this whole thing. Twice now, in one chapter, a person with no rank and no name has redirected the path of the most powerful man in the room. And it isn't over.
So Naaman goes down to the Jordan. And this is where it gets remarkable. He dips once, nothing. Twice, nothing. 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. You can imagine what's going through his mind by now. The humiliation of a general kneeling in a muddy river in front of his own men, still covered in disease, still nothing happening. 6 times. Then the 7th. 2 Kings tells us his flesh comes back like unto the flesh of a little child. Read that phrase again. Out of every possible way to describe restored skin, the text reaches for a child. The same word, almost, that opened this entire chapter, the little girl who started it all. The most decorated general in the Aramean army is healed, and the Bible describes his new skin the same way it described the powerless little servant who set this whole miracle in motion. That's not an accident of language. That's an echo on purpose. Naaman doesn't just walk away healed. He goes back to Elisha, the man who wouldn't even come to his door, and says something no Aramean commander was supposed to say. "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel." The general who came with silver, gold, and an entourage leaves with nothing but a changed allegiance.
A slave girl's 11 words end with a foreign commander confessing the God of the very nation his army had been raiding. There's one more thing this chapter won't let you skip past. Elisha refuses payment, won't touch the silver, won't touch the gold, sends Naaman home with nothing owed. But Gehazi, Elisha's own servant, a man who watched this entire free miracle happen with his own eyes, decides grace like that shouldn't go to waste. He chases Naaman's chariot down the road, invents a story about needing silver for some traveling prophets, and walks away with 2 talents of silver and 2 changes of clothing that were never his to take. You already know how this ends for him. Elisha confronts him, and the very disease that just left Naaman's body, the disease a nameless girl's sentence had just erased, lands on Gehazi instead, and on his descendants after him. One servant gives freely and asks nothing. Another servant sees a miracle and tries to monetize it. The contrast is the whole point. But hold on to this, because we're finally ready to close the loop we opened at the very beginning. Centuries after this chapter closes, a man walks into a synagogue in his own hometown of Nazareth. He unrolls the scroll of Isaiah, reads from it, sits down, and tells the room that the scripture has been fulfilled in their hearing. The crowd is moved for about 30 seconds. Then he keeps talking, and he brings up this exact story. Many lepers were in Israel in the time of the prophet Eliseus, he says, and none of them was cleansed, saving Naaman the Syrian. That's it. That's the sentence that gets him nearly killed. Not a claim to be God, not yet, just a reminder that the God of Israel once chose to heal a foreign general, an enemy, an outsider, over every leper in Israel who might have expected the miracle first. The hometown crowd is so enraged by this that Luke tells us they rise up, drive him out of the town, and lead him to the edge of a cliff to throw him off. Sit with that. The nameless girl's sentence gets repeated by Jesus of Nazareth himself centuries later as proof of exactly the kind of God he came to reveal. A God who works through outsiders, through the powerless, through people nobody bothered to name. And it's dangerous enough to say out loud that it nearly costs him his life decades before the cross ever will. This is not a story about a nation. This is not a story about a religion. This is not a story about who's in and who's out. This is a story about a God who apparently keeps choosing to work his biggest moments through the smallest, most overlooked person available, and who never stopped doing that, all the way from a slave girl's 11 words to a cliff outside Nazareth. Think about that the next time you feel like the least significant person in whatever room you're standing in. Somewhere today, there's a child in a shelter with no papers and no name that anyone bothers to learn, who says one true sentence to exactly the right person, and something moves because of it. Nobody writes it down. Nobody remembers her name either. But heaven does.
So here's what this chapter actually leaves you with. Takeaway 1. The most consequential sentence in 2 Kings chapter 5 doesn't come from the general, the king, or even the prophet. It comes from a captive child who had every reason to stay silent and didn't. If you remember nothing else, remember that the turning point of this entire story was 11 words from someone nobody thought to name. Takeaway 2. You don't need a title to change the direction of someone's life. You don't need a platform, an army, or even your name remembered. The girl never asked for credit. She never got any. Not in her lifetime, not in the text, not anywhere. And her sentence still reached across centuries into a synagogue in Nazareth. And takeaway 3, the one I actually want you to sit with tonight. Heaven kept this girl's sentence long after it stopped keeping her name. Somewhere, right now, God knows exactly who she was. Every detail this chapter left out, he never lost. She wasn't unknown to him for a single second, even while she was unknown to everyone in the room. So here's my question for you, and I actually want you to answer it in the comments. If your name got erased from every record that exists, but one true sentence you said saved someone's life, would that be enough for you? Because somewhere in Aram, thousands of years ago, one girl never got to find out her sentence mattered. She never saw Naaman's healed skin. She never heard the confession he made at the river. She never knew that centuries later, a man in Nazareth would stand up in a synagogue and stake his own life on the story she started. She just said the true thing and let it go. Maybe that's the whole lesson.